And today's show, Leif, Thulin from Locked On NBA Big Board joins the program, and we talk all things Trailblazers draft targets at number 11. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine, make it your first listen, tell your friends to do the same. In today's program, a very fun one, we are joined by one of the co-hosts of Locked On NBA Big Board, Leif Thulin. Leif, how you doing?
Doing well. It's draft season officially now with the combine starting. Obviously, the lottery results are out, and there's a lot of discussion of fits and should teams trade up because how many stars are there in the draft? So it's always a fun time of year, and I'm excited to hop on the Blazers pod and talk about who could be a Trailblazer in a season away from us right now.
Indeed, it is. We are revving up. I know in your world, it's like draft season is a little broader, but for the casuals like myself, I'm like, oh, it's May, time to learn about the draft. So I'm glad you're here to help us learn. So we'll talk about some sort of targets at 11, guys you like, guys I like, and some thoughts. Let's start here, though. You mentioned fit. Are you a fit or best player available guy? Like, what is your philosophy as you approach a draft, particularly with a pick that's like kind of in the later lottery?
I'm a best player available pretty much always. I will say once you get past 10, I think there is more rationale for fit, but I'll still always be a best player available guy because if there's a player that's really good and you can get him, you can tailor a fit to him and your other players can be fit around that type of player as opposed to saying, you know what, like we've got Donovan Clingan. So if Derik Queen is available and I think he's the best player available at 11, I think there's a possibility that happens. You don't skip on him because you have a rookie because they actually work well together, but they do play the same position. So that's just an example, but there's plenty of examples like that. I do think the Blazers' largest necessity is probably a wing that can shoot the ball. But, you know, if there's a guy like Derik Queen, I wouldn't pass on him to find someone that is kind of more of a plug and play, but upside swing at the same time. Because once you get out of the top 10, there are fewer sure things, and upside is upside.
There's been a lot made about the quality of this draft. I think maybe like as it's one of those things. It was like the further away you're like the future draft is awesome, and then once guys dig in, I think people go the other way. They either say like, "Oh, this draft actually doesn't have as much talent," or it has talent but it's not star end. Like, what are your thoughts on sort of the overall quality of this draft?
Yeah, and so I think it's all about perspective because last season's draft was terrible. It quite frankly was awful, and I don't think you're going to get many all-stars out of that draft. I actually am pretty proud of myself. The player that I perceived to be the best player in the draft was Stephon Castle. That was my number one all along last season. He won Rookie of the Year, so that's a good start. And I also think he has the most upside. However, I don't think he's ever going to be better than the third or fourth best player on his team. That's because he's got very good talent around him. I'm not saying anything there. But the reason I bring that up is last year's draft, there was the expectation of being bad. But I thought there was decent depth to be found, because you could see, and there's steals in every draft, but like I cover the Jazz, and Kyle Filipowski and Isaiah Collier were 29th and 32nd respectively. And Collier's 29th and Filipowski's 32nd for those paying attention. And then you look at the Wizards, for instance. The Wizards went 3 for 3 on their picks. They had number 2, and they had 14, and they had 19. So you can do well in those type of drafts, but you have to temper the expectations. This season, I believe 1 through 3, they're all-stars, and I think 1 and 2 could be all-pros. And then I think you have potential all-stars in 4 through 7, and maybe one random guy throughout. And so I think that's a good draft by the definition of, if you look at the better drafts, 5, 6 all-stars is very good. Of course, you need some guy to be the trailblazer, pun intended, of guys that you look at and you say, okay, that's the player of the class, and that's Cooper Flagg, that's Dylan Harper. But I think the Blazers can get someone at 11 that could be a very, very good role player, and maybe you hit a home run and find a guy who can be an all-star. But I think there's a lot of depth to be seen in terms of this guy can play rotational minutes right away and down the road be a more than rotation piece, like a starter and a high-end starter. So I do think there's good depth. I don't think there's as many bona fide all-stars as it was perceived to be when you said this 2024 draft sucks, therefore 25 is going to be wonderful. And maybe I'm doing it already again, but I think 26 is better than 25.
Like so I was just going to say, that's what everyone says. Now it's the 26 draft that's so good. You just wait a year because it's going to get even better. So I think that's with
true.
it. So
I think it's true, but you know, that is the thing. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And so that could be in terms of who you pick, but also in terms of, you know, like not everyone's super presently focused, but the Trailblazers made a great run at the end of the season. Like I'm preaching to the choir here. You know what happened. But I work the Jazz game, so I've seen the Blazers tons of times in person. I work with the broadcast team, and I listen to what they're saying. I'm like, yeah, this team has some belief. I go to Chauncey's press conferences when I'm at those games, and I see the vision. So I don't think the Blazers need to hit a home run, but I certainly, to go back to your first question, I certainly wouldn't say no to a guy that's a bit redundant, but I think has the best talent on the board. So could you go for fit and I wouldn't have any qualms? Absolutely, but I would go best player available.
Yeah, the redundancy is kind of unavoidable based on the youth of the roster. Like they've got a young point guard, they've got a young shooting guard, they've got two young forwards with Tumani and Denny, they've got a young center in Donovan Clingan. No matter who you draft, you're going to be like, well, they already have a young player at that spot. Not to mention Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton and Jeremy Grant. Like redundancy is kind of unavoidable. So for me, it's just like you pick the best player and then the roster, you have to, you know, that's like the challenge of going from where they are to where they want to be is like you have to sort out some of the redundancy, and to do that you would rather have really good players on the team. So let's talk. Who is, if you had to right now at 11, the Blazers are on the clock, who do you like in that spot? And this doesn't have to be your number one absolute, you know, we're recording this in the middle of May. I'll give you 5 weeks to really dial in, but because I'm bringing you back on draft night to make your final prediction. No, it's who do you like? Like who at 11 right now as you sit here? Do you say like this would be a nice fit or an ideal selection for the Trailblazers?
I think it obviously depends on how the board falls. Like you got to see what teams pick ahead. I do think there's a world in which the board falls and a guy like Derik Queen's there, and Derik Queen's a guy I have in my top 7. I just don't think there's as many teams at the very top of the draft that would be willing to take the risk of a slow-footed big because they're trying to turn around their franchise. And I wish maybe I should do this, but I think there's a reason that some teams fall into this trap and a guy like him falls and he ends up being a better player because teams see athleticism and that's an end all be all for the kind of that 5 through 10. Like you got to be really athletic. And unless you're, you know, just the most skilled player ever, you're not going in the top 5 either. So he's got the really good skills. But if I were to rank out most likely to be an all-star, he'd be higher on my board than a lot of guys. And therefore, I personally believe in ceiling. And if you're drafting 1 through 5, you got to find a franchise altering talent. I don't know if he's franchise altering, but I think you can get Alperen Sengun, who went 16th in the draft. And you look at Alperen Sengun, and he goes 16. You look at Domantas Sabonis, he goes 11. So those are two of the guys that I would compare him to because he's not fleet of foot, but he's tremendously skilled and can be an offensive hub. And so I would say that's best case scenario for the Blazers. I'm not guaranteeing he'll be there, but I do think there's a possibility because teams are drawn by athleticism. And the other guy that a lot of people are mocking to the Blazers is Kasparas Jakucinis. And he had a high usage rate. He's a point guard from Illinois. He's got good size, 6'6", kind of plays like a collegiate version of Luka Doncic. But that, with that said, there are some turnovers. There's some lack of fleet of foot things. And then, like we talked about, there's going to be redundancy wherever. And so those are the twoest high potential guys. And for one safe guy, I'm just giving you the highest potential to me is Queen. Jakucionis has a lot of game. I think a guy like Carter Bryant, who from Arizona, would be one that fits the MO of a defensive disruptive wing with potential to shoot the ball. And he could play some of those minutes that will be shared by Kamara as well as Denny, but you play rotational minutes. Those guys are starters. And I know Denny played off the bench plenty, and Shaedon Sharps factors into the mix as well. But you can't have too many guys that are long, athletic, and shoot 38% from 3. So those are 3 guys that I would look at. But I certainly think there's room for players to jump up the board. And there's also a possibility a guy like Queen falls. And if Queen gets picked higher, then someone else could fall into the lap of the Blazers at 11.
I want to ask you about all those guys. Those are names that I'm really intrigued by. We will do that in the second segment. We'll dig in on Derik Queen and Jakucionis, as well as Carter Bryant. Join us in that second segment, won't you? First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Prizepicks. Basketball season is at its peak. With the playoffs heating up, now's the time to put your sports knowledge to work with Prizepicks, the top platform for daily fantasy sports. Prizepicks makes it easy. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, you've got a shot to win up to 2,000 times your entry. So throughout the NBA playoffs, as we get towards the conference finals in both conferences, you can say, I'm going to go over on Jaylen Brown's points, or I'm going to go under on the rebounds for Nikola Jokic. The app takes less than 60 seconds to use, and you can mix and match, not just basketball players, but other sports like baseball, if you're into it, all summer long. And when your picks hit, the payout hits fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, they got things like Taco Tuesday, where player projections are discounted up to 25% for even more value. So download the Prizepicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even have to win. You just have to play that first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks, run your game. All right, still chatting here with Leif Thulin of Locked On NBA Big Board. Leif, you mentioned Derik Queen. Can he play next to, we talked, redundancy and all this, and it's like, can he play next to a center? Could he play power forward in the league? And particularly, what type of center would he need to play next to make it work?
So the answer to that question is yes, because in Maryland, though it's against college players, as a freshman, he played next to another center who's actually going through the NBA draft process right now, in Julian Reese. Julian Reese cannot shoot the ball. And in college, there's less spacing. So it's a resounding yes, because Donovan Clingan is not a shooter. I mean, obviously, he's got decent touch, and that's what the hope is, that he just adds that to his game. But at this point, Donovan Clingan's a rim presence. And I think you could put Derik Queen and Donovan Clingan on the same floor. I think there would be some issues with spacing at the highest levels, but I do think Donovan Clingan's size and defensive rim protection cover up for a lot of Queen's inefficiencies or just deficiencies. And Clingan, for what he does well, he keeps the ball high. He's a decent finisher up top, but he's not particularly fleet of foot or a spacer. Derik Queen's very good at having the ball in his hands from 18 and in. He can face up. He can back you down. He's got good moves on the block. He can do a lot with the ball as a passer. So I think they are compatible, and you don't necessarily have to play them together. I think the growth curve is different too, because Clingan with Ayton isn't always a starter either. But in the long term, the Blazers fans, correct me if I'm wrong, want him to be the starting center. And if you take Derik Queen, there's a world in which you reevaluate then say, okay, Derik Queen's more conducive to success because we have these defensively inclined players next to a player who can score. And maybe there are some issues, but you look at a team like the Kings, and they were a 3 seed a couple of years ago. They lost, and then this year the Rockets were a 2 seed. I would say both those teams were fraudulent, but it's still 50-win teams. And that's a big step up with a youthful core. So that's a guy I would look at, and his best attributes are the guy just has a knack for finding space and scoring, and he's just an offensive creator in a way that I think is a top 10 talent in this draft. Like I mentioned, he's top 7 on my personal board because I really value upside and potential to be the guy on a team as opposed to plug and play. But I think there is some argument for plug and play with the Blazers because you have these young players that haven't quite established a role. But at the same time, if you have a player that hasn't established a role and as the star, and you have a lot of good players, you need someone to do so, and the natural hierarchy takes place. So I don't think there's any real argument for not taking someone at any position. Like you said, there's redundancy is going to happen, and may the best man win. So I think that's a good problem to have for the Blazers. Yeah,
I think obviously he projects as like a center for the most part as a 5, but it's just like if you're thinking out, years down the line, it's like is a top 10 pick that can't play next to your other top 10 picks. I think that's the concern. Derik Queen measured 6'9" at the combine. Is he big enough to play center? Is that the concern? Is like just the overall size, or what? Obviously you've compared him to maybe like non-rim protecting centers in Domas and Şengün, but like is there concern about his just like how big he is, period?
Maybe a little bit, but he's got a wide base, and his wingspan came out decently at nearly 7'1". The concern was that he'd measure in at like 6'8" with like a 6'10" wingspan, and all of this is to say not too much, because I think you look at these measurements and there's a couple guys that surprise, and you're like, wow, that guy's arms are super long, like he measured in tall. That's great, but like we knew Derik Queen was going to be within an inch or two of those measurements in any regard, and he snared rebounds. Like that's what he did. He was a rebounding machine. In fact, his first collegiate game, he had a 20-20 game. Like the productiveness of Derik Queen was very, very impressive. And the other part that I would add is if you had spacing around that guy, I don't think many people can guard him one-on-one. And his best attribute to me is the ability to, one, pick a time to go score, and whether it's driving with a face-up, because most centers aren't used to that, or passing out of maybe a short roll, which they don't really do in college when you have two bigs. I think those are the type of things he'd be very good at and translate well to the NBA. And I heard from a scout and listening to Locked On NBA Big Board the last couple of days, where Raphael and James have been at the combine. They said that a team that is drafting within the top 5, a representative, maybe not the whole front office, said they would take Queen top 5. And so in many of these boards, he's going 9, 10, 11. So I really do think there's a world in which that's the ideal prospect for the Blazers. And I can't promise he'll be there, but if he is, that's the guy I'd scoop up.
I like him just as a player. I'm not 100% sure on fit and like the long-term fit, but as a basketball player, Derik Queen is fun to me. Like the passing and the creativity. I love it. Kasparas Jakucinis, big guard. I think there was some hype that he was a top 5 pick at one point. He's maybe slipped a little bit. What are your thoughts on him? You mentioned him as a potential for the Blazers at 11. What do you like about him?
I like the confidence and usage rate. So he's getting penalized for being the best player on a team. And what I mean by that is when he first came up and all of a sudden was dicing up defenses, everyone was like, oh, top 5 pick. And that the way he's played never changed. It's just that he played better competition with more intense scouting reports, and his team was riddled with inconsistency. At one point, Illinois shot a ton of threes in the season. Then at one point, they benched 2 of their players from their starting lineup that didn't even touch the floor. So not just, let's demote them to the bench. No, they didn't play in games because they wanted to improve their shooting, but they took out their best defensive player. So all of a sudden their team really struggled. And all in the while, Kasparas Jakucinis was a pick and roll savant. He was great in pick and roll. He ran over 200 pick and rolls in college basketball in 35 games. That's an enormous quantity. Very, very few players in the last 5-10 years of college basketball have reached that. He's got a step back 3 that's reminiscent of Luka, particularly on the left side. He's got that guile where you kind of talk about the slow-footed but very crafty professional basketball has been in his blood for a while type of game. I think that there's a real possibility that the reason he's fallen is because people saw too much great stuff early, and then it started to plateau, and people got bored. But that to me means that he's probably pretty good, because if you're seeing top 5 and all of a sudden the inefficiency begins to creep in, and you say, oh, he's a little slow, and people are catching up to him. Well, maybe you look at the context and say, if they shoot better, he's not taking as many of those difficult shots. If they have a consistent center who doesn't get mono in the middle of the season and who prefers to pick and is a pick and pop guy, but instead they have a roll guy, this guy could be throwing alley-oops and look fantastic. So he's the type of guy that, like I said earlier, and this is kind of a cliche, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And to me, his game translates to the NBA very well because he is a true point guard that is 6'6", and that's what's coveted, with the possibility to score off the bounce. And you guys know it in Rip City. Damian Lillard was a weapon because he could shoot threes off the bounce. That's one of the most vital weapons in the NBA and the most difficult to defend. And then pick and roll's the other one. And if you can do both, I think you're going to stick in the NBA, despite his efficiency dipping in the waning moments of the season.
Can he play off the ball, or do you have to maximize him as a true point guard?
I think he'd be best served as a point guard. I do think his shooting touch is good enough to play off the ball. I don't know if I'd like playing him off the ball because while he's 6'6" and size isn't the issue, speed would be an issue. And I think you can cover for more of that as a point guard than you can as a 2 that's supposed to be switchable in today's NBA. That said, the Blazers have an ability to cover up those issues, though. And that's why I like Queen as well, because I think they have the offensive ability to lift up a team, whereas their defense, it's probably not going to be good. I'm just not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be bad. But you look at these teams that the Blazers and the Rockets, I think, have a similar identity to their core of defensive wings and play hard. They need someone to help them score.
Right.
And I think these two guys that I've talked about help you score, and you still have Tumani Kamara. You still have a racer in Donovan Clingan. You've got athletes all over the floor. So what's to say that having a skillful first basketball player as opposed to an athlete who's switchable is actually going to hurt that much?
Yeah, I mean they need some offensive juice. That's the key. And the idea would be that when you have Tumani and you have Denny Avdia, who's not like an elite defender, and he's probably slipped a little bit because he had more offensive responsibility this year, but he's like a totally competent defensive player, plus clinging at the rim, then yeah, you can make up for some of that. I think the challenges right now is like both of their guards, Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, are not particularly good defenders. So it's like add another one to the mix. See how much you can mess with the formula. But I agree, like they just need offensive juice. They need it because the defense was pretty good the second half of the season. In fact, by some metrics, it was awesome, elite by depending on how much you want to credit Jedi magic on 3-point shooting. But that's a conversation for another day. We haven't mentioned Carter Bryant. I think he's an interesting one. We'll talk about him in the third segments, plus a couple other names. Join us there. First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by GameTime, the place to get last-minute tickets. Look, if you're in the area, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds, the atmosphere is just fantastic, and you can experience it live. GameTime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even to the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, GameTime is a total game changer. It's not just NBA playoff tickets, though, although that's a really fun thing to do this time of year. But in our neck of the woods, you can use GameTime's great deals to get last-minute tickets on things like Timbers tickets or Thorns tickets all summer long. Plus, like I said, they got the panoramic view, so you can say, I've never been to this arena before, and you can click the exact seat view before you buy, so there's no surprises. Plus, with the Game Time guarantee, you know you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row, in the same section, they'll credit you up to 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that redemption code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. Still talking here with Leif Thulin from Locked On NBA Big Board and the Utah Jazz radio broadcast. Carter Bryant measured at 6'6.5" with basically a 7-foot wingspan, 6'11 3/4 at the combine. A youngster who wasn't hyper productive in college, but is rising up draft boards because he looks like an NBA player. Sell me on the Bryant idea.
Well, I've been on the Carter Bryant train. Maybe he has the conductor, to be honest, because when he first played in the season, I knew who he was. He was McDonald's All-American, so it's not as if he came out of right field and you said, "Oh, well, who's this guy?" Not one of those stories. However, he joined a team that was littered with upperclassmen and tremendous athletes. So you don't know how those guys who are long and play off the ball will fit in with the team with Caleb Love, with Jaden Bradley, who are both ball in hand guards, with big guys that played two bigs. And in fact, they actually had 3 bigs, and it was a blessing in disguise that their best big got hurt for the season, because then it could simplify the rotation. I say all that to say this. Carter Bryant, you look at the Arizona floor and you say, wow, there are tremendous athletes all over the place. And these guys are older, therefore they're stronger. And the one with the best body and the best traits was Carter Bryant. He was hiding in plain sight. So in November, I did an episode with on NBA Big Board, and I said, you know what? There's a guy in Arizona I'd taken the lottery, and he's getting like 12 minutes a game because the guy's got shoulders that are enormous at 18 years old, long arms, slides his feet, shoots the ball well, rebounds, and makes the right play. His box scores look mundane, but you watch him play, and every attribute is a check physically as well as in the way he plays basketball. I think he actually reminds me a little bit of a guy who's a Blazer now, but I'm going to compare him to before he was a Blazer. He reminds me of Jeremy Grant when he played for the Nuggets, in the sense that Jeremy Grant on the Nuggets was forced to play in his mind because he had more game and he wanted to demonstrate that with the Pistons, but forced to play as a guy who can play the 3 or the 4 and defend smaller guards, as well as, if you need him to, bang with some of the bigger guys and rebound the ball and knock down open threes. That's what Carter Bryant's game is. He's a 3-and-D to a T, and I think 3-and-Ds are overrated because everyone says, oh, we want a 3-and-D. But then you get the Michael Porters who are tremendous shooters can't play a lick of defense. Or you have
you
the
need them to
opposite
dribble, yeah.
Yeah, and you look at Jaden McDaniels, who I adore, and every time I see him, it pains me to my soul because I wanted the Jazz to take him, and I think the Jazz would have won a championship if we took Jaden McDaniels instead of Udoka Azubuike. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but I had to mention it. But Jaden McDaniels, you look at what he does, and he's a tremendous defender, and he's an inept shooter. But he's those are the two spectrums, and both are great. But most people fit into one side of the spectrum and don't have the elite skills that those two do, as one a tremendous defender, one a tremendous shooter. Carter Bryant's someone that reminds me of the ilk of Mikal Bridges. I don't think he's as good as Mikal Bridges, but he's very good at both, and he's got more game than he's been able to demonstrate in a collegiate team that's stacked. And I think Carter Bryant was outside of first rounds up until January, February, and now he's projected as a lottery pick. And that's the type of player that I think the Blazers love, because they want someone who can knock down threes. They're not a particularly good three-point shooting team, and they don't shoot a ton of volume from three. And then you look at the attributes, and it fits into what they've had. And, should Matisse Thybulle not be on the team in the future? This is a guy who could play those minutes, play defensively, maybe not quite as good as Matisse, because Matisse is a fantastic defender, but he's a 10 times better shooter, and he's bigger. So you look at that, and I think he's a guy that could be a lottery pick. And then the other guy that's rising right now has also got Pac-12 roots, and this time still a Pac-12 school, is Wazoo's Cedric Coward, who had committed to Duke, but all the rage is that he's not going to touch Durham's campus because he's been balling out of the combine. 7 foot 2.5 wingspan, 6'6", shoots 39% from three, and I wouldn't be surprised if he sneaks his way into the lottery.
Yeah, Coward is a name that I think in Blazer circles is getting pretty excited. Is 11 too high for him? Like, is that, or do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility. I would say it's probably high, but at the same time, look, I haven't hidden it. I'm a Jazz fan. The Jazz are at 21, and if Cedric Coward's there, I'd be elated. If Carter Bryant's there, I would run around the circles and be absolutely appalled and elated. But the thing that I'd say about Coward is there's untapped potential, because he had a really interesting story. He went to JUCO, then Eastern Washington, Washington State, and he was going to go to Duke, and now he's likely going to be a top 20 pick in the NBA draft. But he
went to Willamette, a D3 school in Salem, Oregon. Let's go. Shout out to the Northwest Conference. Bearcats, stand up. Let's go.
I love it. I have a friend who played at Puget Sound in tennis, and he was telling me about playing Willamette. And then I visited Whitman as a possibility to play tennis and basketball there. So I'm a big fan of these D3 schools, but you don't see too many success stories like him. But to me, what that means is he's really capable of playing multiple roles. Someone who can step in and is humble enough to realize, like, look, I'm here. I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. He's got the defensive traits. I watched his film yesterday and watched him guard a sniper on Iowa, and he had a 9-point game, his worst game of the season. He played 6 games in the season, and I watched his worst game, and his defensive intensity and intangibles are through the roof. I'm high on him. 11, I wouldn't be mad, but I would be a little surprised if he goes there. But I just thought I'd mention him because he's a Pacific Northwest guy, and he's drawing a lot of buzz.
Okay, I know you got to get out of here, and we got to get out of here too, because that's the format of the program. But I'm gonna give you 3 names, and we'll just go quickly draft or pass, assuming the Blazers are at 11. Let's start with Rasheed Fleming, draft or pass.
It's a little rich for my blood, but talk about a combine riser. Like, he had a 7'5" wingspan, shoots 38.5% from three, played at St. Joe's, played pretty well in their biggest games where they beat Texas Tech, who was an Elite 8 team who easily could have made the Final Four. He's a guy that his shot isn't quite textbook, but it's effective. And he actually was targeted to shoot the ball. He wasn't a dare shooter. They were usually on pick and pop. So he did have some space to shoot it. So I actually believe more in the shot than I initially did. The traits are there. The want to's there. 11's a little rich for me, but if you got him at 17, let's say, I understand that's not how the draft works, but
yeah.
I feel like it's not too crazy of a rise.
Yeah, I that's kind of where I'm at on him too. I think maybe the upside isn't there for him to be good, but I would imagine he's an NBA player. Noah Senge, draft or pass?
I'll say draft. This is a ballsy one. You gotta have trust in your scouting department and your development, because you've seen a lot of these French guys who come in who are tremendous athletes, and they're long. Tijon Salam being the most notable recently to me, where you say, wow, he had a couple games with encouraging signs of being super long, but now it's not just potential. He put it together in a playoff game, and he had 20 in a playoff game, and everyone rose him up the board, myself included. and I watched him shoot warm-up shots of the Jazz, and I said, I don't know about that. Like I watched him shoot, and it's this weird weaving motion, and his legs are too long for his body, and he's going to be a fine player because he's got tremendous traits, but like you just don't see it immediately. Asenge, the one redeeming quality, though he has those baby giraffe type tendencies, is he's actually got substance in the sense that he draws fouls at an elite rate, and in fact an alarming rate. If you remember Julius Randle at Kentucky, and same Julius Randle, it's on a bruising presence on the T-Wolves. He shot a ton of free throws for Kentucky. Noah Asenge's free throw rate is higher than that of Julius Randle at Kentucky's. So there is some like real application of length and strength, and his shot doesn't look broken, though I would not tell you it's a beautiful shot.
Yeah, he's not a shooter yet, but I think, Asenge seems like a Blazer pick because he's like a raw athlete that they hope they can mold. They've gone that direction a couple times in the past. Okay, the last one for you, Asena Newell, draft or pass?
I'm torn because I think he could be fine. I don't see the upside that some do. Like one of my colleagues at Big Board, Richard Stamen, he's had Asa as high as 3 or 4 in the draft. And I really like the way that he plays with energy, but I don't know if I believe he's a 5. And if he's a 5, he's very slender and he doesn't, have that interior presence against the NBA, the grown men. And if he's a 4, I don't know if he shoots well enough. So he's a bit of a tweener to me. Scares me a touch, but I wouldn't be like furious if I'm a Blazer fan, but it wouldn't be my favorite pick.
Yeah, the tweener stuff is what it is for me. I think he's 4-sized, 5 skilled, and I think that it can be a little bit tough. Obviously, you can grow, and he's young, and he can get whatever. But like to me, that is my holdup. That is it's. I think we're mostly on the same page, Leif. I love it. You are going to be everywhere over the next 5 weeks preparing for the draft. So where can folks find more of your stuff?
Yeah, I'll be tweeting off my Twitter, and it's just my name, LeifThulin. And if you guys got any questions, whether it's about the Blazers or just draft prospects, I'm happy to engage there. And if you listen to Locked On NBA Big Board, I'll be there. And as of right now, I'm hosting Locked On Wizards. I'm a stopgap right now, so I'm talking about the draft. They're picking 6. It's not too different from where the Blazers are at 11, so you'll see a lot of overlap and maybe learn about some prospects there. So I'm all over the place on Locked On and on Twitter. So if you guys want to engage, I'm more than happy to oblige. Awesome. Thank you so much, Leif. I really appreciate you stopping by. Dear listeners, go check him out. Apparently he's everywhere 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Come back for next week's shows is what we do. 5 of them each and every weekday. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.